It is summer at Quail Ridge Reserve on Lake Berryessa in beautiful Napa County, California. Most flowers have now passed into seed forms, and the perennial species are dormant. For thousands of years, the Patwin or Wintun Indians gathered the corms of these flowers by digging them up after locating the dead stalks. The Patwin women, like Native American women throughout the North American West, literally cultured and maintained vast flower beds of native plants as part of their food gathering techniques. Subsistence was comparatively easy for California's native peoples. Before contact with Europeans, California Indians spoke up to 83 different dialects and languages. This linguistic diversity was more intense here than anywhere else in North America. Food was abundant amongst relatively peaceful neighbors. There were neither guns nor horses. There were no buffalo here, but the large tule elk and the wily pronghorned antelope were abundant. Both were bagged only occasionally after great effort on the part of the hunter. There was trading of shells for beads and ornaments from the coast, for skins and dried salmon from the Sacramento Valley area. Many of these trading trails developed into horse and wagon trails, and are now modern roads and highways. The Patwin's boundary extended over several ecological distinct habitats, and this required different food gathering methods: the riverine, the valley, and the foothill. Quail Ridge Reserve is located within the foothill type. The Coast Range, on the western side of the Sacramento Valley, where the reserve is located, and the Sierra foothills on the eastern side of the valley have very similar ecology, so both are classified as foothill type. Putah Creek was a source of fish that were caught in large weirs or nets along the creek shores. Sometimes individuals would spear fish as the fish swam near the river banks. Another tool used by the Patwin to gather food and to control their environment somewhat was fire. Larger fires were set to clear areas of thick brush and undergrowth in order to facilitate hunting and to draw game to new green shoots. Smaller fires were used to kill grasshoppers and other edible insects, roasted to perfection on the spot. Small fires were also used to stimulate fresh and even growth of grasses used in basket making. The women would control the shape and flexibility of the grass, leading to the crafting of more durable and beautiful baskets. Fire also stimulated better growth of grasses, such as Elamus glaucus, the blue wild rye, which were beaten into baskets by the women and later roasted, yielding a grain product for their families. California native perennial grasses once covered 25 million acres of California, nearly 1/4 of the state. Grass seed was abundant everywhere. Some native perennials, Melica, Nacella, went dormant during the summer, giving the true original golden hills of California, while other species such as Festuca californica remained green all summer, even in the absence of rainfall. Along the permanent waterways and even where water flowed only during winter, Quercus lobata, or valley oak, was found in abundance. It is one of the largest oak species in the world. Up any grade or hill where the water table and ground moisture dropped off, Quercus douglasi, or the blue oak, took over as the dominant oak species, mostly on the hot south-facing slopes. Valley oak and blue oak are both very dependent on native perennial grasses for their germination and subsequent early growth, especially during their first and second dry, hot summers, because their downward growing oak roots receive moisture from the perennial grass root mass. This root mass may go as deep as 6 to 15 feet. Young oak trees rely on their moisture until their own roots are able to extend even more deeply to reach permanent water. There is also a complex relationship between the mycorrhizomes of the grass roots and those of the oaks. Interior live oak, Quercus wislesinii, is found on both north and south-facing slopes of the Coast Range and Quail Ridge Reserve. John Muir described the species as a great green globular sphere. On the reserve, it is hybridized with the coast live oak, Quercus agrifolia, and intermediates are sometimes seen. The Kellogg's black oak, Quercus kelloggii, is found on the north-facing slopes of Quail Ridge Reserve, where there is more relative ground moisture. The forest here is a deciduous one, interspersed with foothill pine, Pinus sabiniana, unlike the south-facing slopes, which is oak savanna. If one wanted to find a place with the most native species still surviving today, it would be the north-facing slopes. The ground moisture here is such that the more drought-tolerant Mediterranean invading plants do not take hold. This is what a Patwin child playing, or a woman gathering, or a hunter tracking game would have seen thousands of years ago. Occasionally, a wanderer will come across a hybrid oak resulting from the cross between Kellogg's black oak and interior live oak. This hybrid is called oracle oak, Quercus morhus, a viable hybrid species which can also cross back to either parental stock, resulting in intermediates that more resemble one parent or the other. Bees and other pollinators, as they move among different oak species, are responsible for such crosses. Another smaller oak found on the reserve is scrub oak. This looks superficially similar to interior live oak, but the underside of the scrub oak leaf is matte, while that on the interior live oak is shiny. Even though this is a smaller species of oak, its acorns are numerous and relatively large. Another interesting and occasional hybrid species found on the reserve is Townsend's oak, Quercus townsendii. The leaves are truly an intermediate between the two parents, valley oak, Quercus lobata, and blue oak, Quercus douglasi. This will be a good year for acorns. Not all years are. The Patwin had favorite and less favorite species of oak acorn for making their acorn mush. The acorns were gathered and stored in cribs, safe from hungry rodents. Eaten in conjunction with fish, acorns yielded a reasonably balanced diet. There were years when the acorn crop could be scarce or non-existent. A backup food supply was found in the understory tree known as the California buckeye. During the summer, its metabolism decreases, its leaves turn brown and drop off. Only the large nut continues to grow. The tree is estivating, a sort of summer hibernation caused by increased heat and lack of moisture. The Patwin were able to utilize the nuts as food in years when acorns were not produced or were not very plentiful. The buckeye was not highly esteemed by the Patwin, but they were glad to have it when acorns were scarce. Many other plants were found along the trails the Indians walked. The beautiful manzanita with its lovely red bark, the elderberry along flowing streams, the toyon with its lovely winter berries, the soap plant used for so many ways of the Indian life, the lovely pale iris on hillsides, the sticky monkey flower with its lovely orange flowers, and the goldback fern found in the more remote, dark pathways of the forest. Besides tule elk and pronged-horned antelope, black-tailed deer, a subspecies of the mule deer, lives in the Coast Range. For the Patwin, it was another important food mammal, which they hunted with bow and arrow. Into the valley of the Patwin, the Berryessa family moved in 1842. They had come with wagons and cattle after being outfitted and supplied by General Vallejo himself, a service he rendered to many Mexican settlers in the area who lived east of San Francisco. The Berryessa brothers, Sisto and Jose de Jesus, arrived in the valley, which they claimed and subsequently named El Rancho de las Putas, which, in the Putas part of the epitaph, was perhaps a misrendering in Spanish of a local Indian name for suckerfish, a native species inhabiting the stream that flowed through the ranch. Like all potential owners of a Mexican land grant, the Berryessa brothers had to draw a diseño, or freehand map, of the property claimed by them, and they had to accompany it with a supplication to the Mexican authorities in Sonoma. Then there was a request to the governor in Monterey a year later, on the 20th of October, 1843, asking for 8 sites of land. A site, or square league, is approximately 4,438 acres. Thus, they were requesting over 35,500 acres. Because of the rapidity of the exchange of subsequent correspondence, it seems likely that the Berryessa brothers, or their representative, were actually in Monterey. It appears they would be granted only 4 sites of land, because 10 days later, a second request was written, stating that
our family having grown a great deal, including all our fathers, brothers, and our children, counting also a little more than 100 non-Christian Indians who are around us, we wish all to live in the same site that we are requesting, and in 4 sites, which what Your Excellency has graciously deemed to grant to us. We cannot fit. Thus we need land for our livestock, our flocks, land for the tillage, and then in addition for the subsistence of our whole family, it is necessary to maintain the Indians to avoid, to some measure, the thefts that they will be able to carry out. For all that has been posited, we request from Your Excellency that you deign to grant to us the other 4 sites of our major livestock, hoping that Your Excellency will cooperate in our well-being.
the response to the 2 supplications were made on the 3rd of November, 1843. The brothers were granted the acreage they wanted, with various stipulations that they had to fulfill in order to own the land. Among the stipulations were: a house had to be built on the land within 1 year. Domesticated trees had to be planted within and around the periphery of the property to mark its borders. As an aside, this would have been very difficult due to the lack of rainfall for nearly 7 to 9 months a year, and the property could never be subdivided or sold. Over the years, several adobes were built and enclosed with wooden exteriors. The first 2 constructed were for each of the 2 brothers, one adobe on either side of the Puta Creek, then called El Rio de las Putas. Cattle and other domestic stock were built up in numbers and moved around the ranch, as well as being driven over the mountains to the ranch of their other 3 brothers, Francisco, Yomocillo, and Santiago. The oaks, now in their muted fall colors, the blue oak, black oak, interior live oak, losing some but not all of its leaves, the valley oak, and the oracle oak. These were all part of the passing scenery as the Berryessas made their autumnal cattle drives. The oak's acorns were no longer gathered to be consumed by humans, but were now fed to the cattle and pigs. The Patuin's traditional subsistence food had been turned into supplementary animal feed in the blink of an eye. The native bunch grasses were severely grazed down by the new cattle-owning settlers, with a lasting result, one that impacts us today: the establishment of large numbers of new, non-native annual grasses and thistles that opportunistically took root once the native perennials had been diminished or eliminated. In addition, other non-native plants were slipping into California by way of sheep's wool, in packing for dishware, in earth ballast from ships, and by the Spanish missionaries, homesick for their old world plants, who requested innumerable bags of oat and brome seed. These bags arrived with the requested seeds, but they also contained many other seeds that would later cause tremendous and costly management problems for the state of California. The Berryessa's vast cattle ranch also had its ever-changing grazed land. What did not change were the trees and shrubs of the area, for introduction of foreign larger species had not occurred. The beautiful redbud is a forest legume that adds nitrogen to the soil for all plants to use. The buckeye, still estivating, now has developed large seeds ready to fall when the first winter rains arrive. These seeds, like the acorns, are no longer gathered for food. The beautiful red-barked manzanita stands out as part of the autumn colors. The toyon, or Christmas berry, by late fall, has developed large fruits, many of which become bright red and are gradually eaten by birds over the course of the winter. The leaves turn red after falling on the ground. The Berryessas did not use the toyon berries to make a beverage, as the Patwin Indians had done before them. Soap plant dies back completely in the fall. It, too, is no longer utilized by humans. The iris remains somewhat green during the autumn months, while sticky monkey flowers have become brown in readiness for winter. California became a state in 1849 as a result of the gold rush. The Berryessas by then had a new problem. They had to have their land surveyed by a U.S. surveyor. This was first done in 1853. After the borders were newly determined by the surveyors, the land grantees were granted a new deed several years later in 1859. However, during the interval between 1853 and 1859, squatters had started staking claim to parts of the Berryessa Ranch and others. The story goes that the Berryessa brothers lost part of their ranch as a result of squatters' claims being upheld by the U.S. courts. Another story is that the Berryessa brothers lost the ranch piece by piece as a result of their gambling activities. Whether this happened or not is hard to verify. More certain is that widows or other family members sold off parcels as needed to meet expenses and pay off debts. The town of Monticello had begun to grow up around the site of the original Berryessa adobe on the east side of Puda Creek. And legend has it that Sisto, one of the two Berryessa brothers settling in this area, had retreated to what is now called Spanish Flat on the western side of the valley. The foundation of his house supposedly remains near the present site of the Monticello Cemetery, which was moved to the flat when the valley was flooded by the building of the Monticello Dam in the 1950s. The town grew to several streets, a post office, a hardware and general store, a hotel, and the valley boasted of having the first telephone system in California. There were several schoolhouses in the valley. This is the remains of the old schoolhouse in Cherry Valley. Monticello town became the venue for 4th of July rodeos, baseball games, and cow roasts, drawing people from miles around. There was dryland farming in the Berryessa Valley, with the production of livestock and grain. There was also a canal system developed to shunt water to where it was needed. The old Monticello Cemetery told much of the history of the area and its people. In winter, the rainy season in this part of California, the drought-tolerant plant life is replenished with water. The wild black walnut still dormant with a few old nuts from the season past. The valley oak twigs and branches drip with water, a few new green leaves in evidence. The interior live oak, on the other hand, keeps most of its leaves from past years and is one of the plants maintaining a green allure even in the winter forest landscape. The mist, passing over and through the ridges, impart a mysterious aura to the landscape. The manzanita flowers profusely in January. The beautiful Indian warrior blossoms amongst fallen manzanita petals. Unlike the evergreens, toyon and manzanita, poison oak remains lifeless in appearance, the only clear color being the gray-green lichens that grow on its stem and branches. The ever-increasing non-native annual grasses of California now green up with the winter rains, and soon catch up in color with the native perennials turning green, which start even before the rains begin. With the rains, the fallen leaves, once colorful, now darken and start to decay. In the early 1950s, rumors circulated the valley that a dam would be built. It turned out to be true. The residents of Monticello and the rest of the valley fought this development, but they lost. The dam was completed in 1957, and millions of acre-feet of water rapidly filled in behind it. The glory hole, or the overfill, would take the excess water in heavy rainfall years. Later, a hydroelectric system was added to generate electricity. The town and the valley are now long gone, leaving the second largest human-made lake in California, Lake Berryessa, which surrounds the Quail Ridge Peninsula. The osprey now presides over this enlarged watery territory, hunting fish for its offspring, while the Cooper's hawk hunts small birds amongst the forests of Quail Ridge Reserve. As the spring months of March, April, and May unfold, the winter rains diminish and then cease. The hills of Quail Ridge Reserve become greener, this being one of the few areas remaining in California where many species of native bunch grasses abound. One can see here what the state truly looked like before settlement by large numbers of non-indigenous peoples, who brought with them the plow, massive herds of grazing animals, road-building equipment, and many noxious weeds. With the activities of overgrazing, plowing, and construction, which laid bare enormous areas of native plant cover, pioneer weeds, or introduced species, spread rapidly into these inhospitable terrains. In the U.S., we lose 8,000 acres daily to weeds on federal lands alone. In California, it is estimated that 25 million acres, or about 1/4 of the state, was covered with native bunch grasses, and that today only about 1%, or 100,000 acres, survive. In contrast, star thistle, only one of hundreds of introduced weeds in the state, now covers perhaps 10 to 15 million acres of California. At Quail Ridge Reserve, one can see and learn just how powerful and effective native bunch grasses can be when planted and managed properly in outcompeting non-native pioneer weeds. The perennial bunch grasses with deep roots of 6 to 15 feet are able to outcompete even the drought-tolerant pioneer weeds. But, equally importantly, these perennial grasses aid the young first and second year oaks, especially blue oak and valley oak, during the dry summer months by providing moisture for the young oak's roots until they are able to reach permanent water at deeper levels of the earth, and thus fend for themselves. With the loss of most of the state's bunch grasses, many young oaks die in their first year or two of desiccation, or drying out. In habitats made up of native plants, as compared with areas of non-natives, one always finds larger numbers of mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, insects, and other forms of fauna, because they all relate to the plant worlds with which they have evolved and now rely on for food, shelter, and structure of the habitat. At Quail Ridge Reserve, a balanced relationship between flora and fauna exists, thus making the reserve an invaluable source for researchers interested in studying a less disturbed place in order to understand better what needs to be done to restore places that have been seriously disturbed by humans. It is important to remember that this sort of research, investigating intact models for habitat restoration, is an essential function of undisturbed reserves. In short, reserves such as Quail Ridge Reserve bring benefits beyond the obvious one of preserving plants and animals for future generations to appreciate. At the small but growing Quail Ridge House Visitor Center, one can learn about the interesting flora and fauna to be seen in the 2,000-acre reserve. Active fundraising is underway to finish purchasing the center, as well as to complete the purchase of several key parcels currently held by Quail Ridge Wilderness Conservancy. The Conservancy is developing a variety of educational programs for families, clubs, and other groups, and for teachers and school children. The center's museum houses a number of materials rarely seen elsewhere by the public on the history of the Lake Berryessa region and on the ways people impacted the lands of California. These materials come alive when coupled with stories gleaned from history. Quail Ridge Reserve is a wonder to visit any time of the year, but spring is especially wonderful with the unfolding of new leaves. Flowers such as the first woodland stars, Indian paintbrush, owl clover, lupins, including the perennial bush lupin, blue-eyed grass, which is really an iris, mule-ear sunflower, redbud, chamois chaparral or greasewood in bloom, which adds color to major parts of the hills, and the late-blooming, small but brilliant woolly sunflower. Amongst the flowers rises one of the finest stands of native grasses in native oak habitat in the entire state of California. As with all reserves, constant vigilance and stewardship are required in order to protect these last remnants of native habitats. You may participate in the stewardship of this magnificent reserve by becoming a member of Quail Ridge Wilderness Conservancy, by volunteering to work on reserve projects, or by becoming a special benefactor of the reserve. Please contact us for more information at any of the following.